Hey everybody, welcome back to Eating with Evans. This week we're going to make a homemade pizza dough. We're going to top that with some freshly grated mozzarella cheese and some nice spicy pepperoni. To make this recipe we're going to need 3 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt, 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil plus a little bit more to brush on the dough, 1 packet of instant dry yeast, and 1 tablespoon of sugar to activate that dry yeast. So what I have here is 1 1/3 cups of warm water. I don't know if you can read this, but the thermometer says that it's a little over 105 degrees, and this is perfect because we need warm water to activate our dry yeast. So between 105 and 110 degrees is about the perfect temperature you want for this water. If it's too hot, it's going to kill the yeast. If it's too cold, it's not going to activate it very quickly. So to this warm water, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of sugar, and I'm going to whisk this to combine. And once you can see that the sugar is fully dissolved, I'm going to sprinkle in my 1 packet of instant dry yeast. And then I'm going to whisk this to combine. As soon as I whisk the water and yeast mixture together, I got a smell of the yeast activating. It smelled kind of like bread or beer, which makes total sense. So I'm going to let this sit on the side for about 10 minutes, and you should start to see some foaming on the top, and that's the yeast activating. I've grabbed a large stainless steel bowl, and in this I'm going to add 3 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, and I'm going to also add my 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt to this mixture. 1, 2, 3, 3.5, 3 3/4. And now to this flour I'm going to add my 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt. 1.5. And I'm going to whisk this to combine. I'm whisking this just to add a little air to this flour to break it up a little bit, and I also just want to make sure that the salt is evenly distributed throughout the flour so you don't have one pocket where there's a little too much salt. And now that this is combined, I'm going to just make a little bit of a well in the middle of my flour so that when I pour my liquid mixture of the water and the yeast into this, it'll have a reservoir to go into, and then I'm going to mix that together into a shaggy dough. So I've allowed the water and yeast mixture to sit for about 10 minutes. You can see all the bubbles that started forming, and that's the yeast that started to be activated by that warm water and the sugar that we added to it. The yeast is currently eating on the sugar, and it's burping out CO2 gas, and that's what you're seeing. To this mixture, I'm going to add in 3 tablespoons of high-quality extra virgin olive oil. You want to make sure you use a high-quality olive oil here because you're going to taste it in the finished dough. Then you want to stir this a little bit to combine. Now I'm going to gradually pour my yeast and water mixture into my flour, and I'm going to stir this to combine to make a shaggy dough. This is what your shaggy dough is going to look like once it's fully formed. You can see the edges are a little bit ragged. That's what they mean by a shaggy dough. So what we need to do now is turn this out onto my work surface. So I'm going to lightly dust flour on the work surface, put my dough on it, and then I'm going to start to knead it for about 5 minutes. Dust the work surface. When I'm dusting flour on a work surface, all I'm really doing is opening my fingers up a little bit, holding it upside down, and shaking. And then you can spread it out a little bit and turn out your dough. At this point, we just need to knead this dough for about 5 minutes until it's elastic and smooth. When I'm kneading, all I'm doing is folding the dough over on itself and pushing it out, and then I turn the dough 90 degrees, fold it over again, and push it out onto itself. If you see that it's starting to stick, just add a little bit more flour and dust the top of the dough. So at this point I've kneaded my dough for 5 minutes. You can see how elastic it is. When I push into it, it bounces back. So I've developed a good amount of gluten in this dough. Essentially, gluten is a protein structure that you develop by working this dough when water and wheat flour is mixed together. So at this point what I want to do is divide this dough into 2 using my bench scraper. I'm going to form 2 individual dough balls from this. And these are the 2 portions of pizza dough that I'm going to use in my recipe. I have 2 large mixing bowls that I'm going to add about a tablespoon of olive oil to each one. And just using my hand, I'm going to rub around the inside of the bowl. By rubbing the oil along the inside of the bowl, when I put my dough ball into this bowl, as it rises for the next hour or so, this will ensure that the dough ball is not going to stick to the sides of my bowl. So I'm going to add in one of my dough balls to this one, and I'm going to add my other dough ball to the second bowl, and I'm going to add a little olive oil to the top of each dough ball, probably about a teaspoon's worth, and I'm going to rub that along the top. I don't want the dough to dry out and form a crust on the top, so this olive oil is going to help with that. So now I'm going to cover each of these dough balls with plastic wrap, and I'm just going to gently put it over the top. This plastic wrap is also to just help it from drying out. And now that we've put plastic wrap over these dough balls, I'm going to let them sit out at room temperature in my kitchen for about an hour or until they've doubled in size. While my dough is rising, I'm going to start preparing the other ingredients for my pizza. What I've got here is about a pound of whole milk mozzarella that I'm going to grate here on my cheese grater. I like using whole milk because it's got a lot more flavor than the part skim low moisture mozzarella that you can get at the store. When you're using a home oven, I recommend getting low moisture mozzarella. If you buy the fresh mozzarella, there's a lot of water content within that cheese that can kind of seep through into your pizza and you can end up with a soggy crust. If you have a really high temperature oven that can get up to say 700 or 800 degrees like the professionals do, then be my guest. I think a lot of the moisture would be driven off. But for this application, using low moisture whole milk mozzarella will help you get a crispier crust without any sogginess coming from the cheese. I also recommend grating your own cheese for this. As I've mentioned before in other videos, when you get pre-grated cheese, it can be packed with some anti-caking agents, and one of them they like to use is called cellulose, which is basically sawdust. So I recommend grating your own cheese. It'll taste a lot better and it'll melt a lot easier. I ended up deciding to just stop at half a pound of the mozzarella cheese for one pizza. After I grated it, I realized how much it really was. So for one pizza, I'm going to stop at half a pound of cheese. This is my half a pound of grated, low moisture, whole milk mozzarella. For this recipe, we're also going to be using freshly grated Parmesan cheese, jarred tomato sauce. I like this one by Rao's. And I also picked up some nice spicy pepperoni that's going to go great with the cheese and the crust for this pizza. It's been about a half an hour, and looking at the dough, it looks like it's doubled in size. I used fast-acting yeast for this, so it makes sense that this doubled in size a little quicker than I was expecting. So at this point, what I really want to do now is kind of punch down the dough so that I let out some of the gas that's trapped inside of here. And I'm actually going to wrap one of these up to be frozen. So now I'm going to punch the dough down a little bit to let the gas out. And I'm going to turn this out onto my work surface. I'm going to form this into a ball that I can easily wrap into plastic wrap. I'm going to wrap this in at least 2 layers of plastic wrap to make sure nothing really happens to it. And then I'm going to put it into a Ziploc baggie that I've labeled with the date and also what it is, so that when I go to pull it from the freezer, I know exactly when I made it. Now on a busy weeknight later in the year, I'll be able to pull this out and make a fresh pizza quickly and easily. So now that we've got our second ball of dough, I'm going to remove the plastic wrap. I'm going to punch down some of the excess gas. I'm going to take a little bit of flour, just a light amount, and dust my work surface. And then I'm going to turn my dough ball out onto that work surface. And I'm going to lightly dust the flour on the top. Spread it around, just to remove some of the tackiness. Then I'm going to start to stretch and form my dough. At this point, my dough is ready to be transferred onto my pizza peel. What I like to do is take my pizza peel and sprinkle on a little cornmeal. Cornmeal is basically ground up corn. Essentially, it's going to act like little ball bearings or little round orbs that my pizza dough can kind of roll around on. So this is going to make it a little easier to get off of this wooden pizza peel onto the pizza stone that's in my oven. In order to transfer this pizza dough, I'm gonna flip it up onto my hands and lay it out onto my pizza peel. And now I'm just gonna stretch it to fit the size of my pizza peel. And you can see when I shake this pizza dough on the pizza peel, the cornmeal is kind of acting as ball bearings under the pizza dough. At this point, you want to make sure that your oven's been preheating for about a half an hour at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Now to my pizza dough, I'm going to add my pizza sauce. I like to start in the center and use the back of my spoon to spread it out. I don't put too much pizza sauce on because I don't really want it to be soupy. I like to leave between a half an inch and an inch all the way around so that I have a nice crust at the end. At this point, I'm going to add a pinch of kosher salt all the way around the pizza, just adding a layer of flavor. And now I'm going to sprinkle on some of the mozzarella cheese that I pre-grated myself. Next, I'm going to grate on some fresh Parmesan cheese. I'm going to sprinkle on some Italian seasoning, which has some oregano, some dried parsley, some dried basil. And now I'm going to layer my pepperoni on the pizza. At this point, the pizza is ready to be transferred onto my pizza stone, which has been preheating in a 500-degree oven for about 30 minutes. What I've got in my oven is a pizza stone that's been preheating for 30 minutes in a 500-degree oven, and above that, on the top rack, I've put an old baking sheet. This kind of creates an oven within the oven, so it's going to make sure that the cheese gets all melty and the crust gets golden brown on the top, as well as the crispy crust that we're going to get from the bottom of the pizza stone. So at this point, we're going to transfer our pizza into a 500-degree oven for about 15 minutes. This is the pizza that I just pulled out of the oven. You can tell that I started getting some nice golden brown along the edge of the crust, and the cheese started to caramelize a good amount from having that sheet pan right above it in the oven. And this pizza only took between 10 and 15 minutes to cook. I recommend letting your pizza rest for about 5 minutes before you cut into it. This way it's not a sloppy mess when you go to cut into it. And this is the final dish. This is some homemade pizza crust that we made in less than an hour, topped with some sauce, freshly grated cheese, and some spicy pepperoni. If you want, you can totally avoid the pepperoni and top it with whatever you'd like, even just cheese, and it would be absolutely delicious. Because this dough is so versatile, you can make it ahead of time and freeze it so that you can pull it out and use it anytime during the week for a quick midweek meal. Hey everybody, I hope you love that recipe for my simple homemade pizza crust as much as I do. If you did, be sure to drop a like down below. While you're down there, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications by hitting the bell icon. When you do that, you get a push notification to your phone every single time I put out a new video. If you haven't already, check out my Instagram page here at Eating with Evans. This is where I post all the meals that I make throughout the week that you wouldn't necessarily see here on YouTube. Until next time.
Want some? Go ahead. Here's some pizza crust. Do you like the pizza crust? Ooh, that's good. Here you go. Here's some more pizza crust. It's pizza time. Oh, was that good? Ready? Can I have a high five? Oh, that was a good girl.